Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the class on receiving information. My name is Swapnil Kamat. You don't need a long introduction anymore. I have Arunima Kamat with me, who you know is the mastermind behind this content. We have to let you in on a little joke that we have around this session. We've tried recording this session 3 times during the day, and we have 2 or 3 times, yeah, and we have failed on multiple occasions due to bad internet connections, drilling happening somewhere. So here we are late at night recording this session, but we're still equally excited about recording the session. Aren't you, Arunima? You don't look very excited.
Yes. No, I am.
You are. Okay, we worked very hard on this content, so we are excited. Arunima, you can go on your logo mode, and you can appear when you have a question or to bring me in the right direction. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the classes so far. I hope you enjoyed the coaching session so far. And I'm pretty sure that you are going to enjoy this session that we're going to do on receiving information, on how to listen better, how to ask questions, probe, and the importance of reconfirming at the end, right? So there's a lot of ground to cover here, but it's going to be a good class for you, right? Now, when I start talking about the subject of listening, the first thing that I always mention is 50% of all verbal communication is about receiving information or listening primarily. That's 50% of communication. So if you get better at listening, it's literally without even having to speak, you can improve 50% of your communication. However, the problem in India, and I'm presuming all over the world, is that most people do not give listening the kind of importance that it deserves. It's largely because if you're a bad speaker, it's very obvious to the person in front of you that you're a bad speaker. If you're not an effective writer, it's very easy for the person in front of you to know, or who receives your communication to know, that you're not a very good writer. But if you're not a good listener, sometimes that element remains hidden. It doesn't remain hidden in the long run, but sometimes it's kind of easy to hide that aspect of your communication, right? But I'm sure by the end of the class, you will know how important listening is. And just given the fact that it's 50% of all communication, you need to know that it's important, and we need to do that very, very, very well, right? Now, um, we started the first class, the communication fundamental part A. We started by defining communication, and we said effective communication is about understanding or being understood specifically, clearly, and without any doubt, right? That's what we spoke about. So when you're receiving information, 50% of communication, you need to receive communication specifically, clearly, and without any doubt. And if you can do that, that is what's going to make you an effective communicator, right? That's what we're going to do. Now, we've spent close to 4 classes on teaching you how to speak better and write better, right? There are many more classes on that subject, but we've already covered communication fundamentals. We've covered how to improve your fluency. We've covered structured communication. We've covered the precision model of communication. We have covered how to speak with impact on your body language. So much focus on the speaking and writing part. So this is one class which is going to focus on the listening part, right? So let's dive right into it. Receiving information essentially has 3 parts to it, right? It has the active listening part, it has the probing and asking question part, and it has the reconfirming and summarizing part. We're going to dive into the listening part first. And I love this quote, right? This quote which says, listen in a way where people want to speak to you, and speak in a way where people want to listen to you, right? That's what we're trying to do with you all through the communication coaching program. We're trying to improve both these aspects of your communication, right? And this is a really nice thought, encompasses just about everything in listening. Now, when it comes to the topic of listening, we want you to start by doing a little bit of brainstorm yourself, right? Doing with a little bit of thinking yourself. So I'm going to explain each one of these questions, and then you can pause the video right here answer these questions first on a notepad. So you do your own brainstorm before you go through this session, and then we will continue with it, right? So question number one, for which you need to give a 3-point answer on your own notepad, is why is listening so important, right? In your opinion. So give your 3-point answer there. The second question is an interesting one. Who are the two best listeners you know? One from your personal life and one from your professional life, right? So think of these two people that you know that are the best listeners. Now, the third question is, what makes good listeners effective at listening? So you can also think of the people that you just wrote, and you can think about what really makes them effective at listening, right? And come up with any 5 points of that. The fourth question is, in your opinion, what mistakes do you make while listening to others, right? Can you identify any mistakes that you make, and list down any 3 to 5 points of the mistakes you think you're making currently, even without going through this class. And the last question is where you need to write down at least one example of it, or at least think of one, is think of a time you didn't listen well, and what was the consequence of you not listening effectively, right? And in this question you can think of something that happened on the professional side or something that happened on the personal side, right? On any one of these sides. So this is the time where you pause the lecture and make a note of all your answers, and don't be lazy around this. Don't cheat at this point, because you're cheating nobody but yourself if you don't do this brainstorm. Okay, so press the pause button now. Now, I'm hoping you've done this exercise after pausing this thing. So now let's get to the importance of listening, right? Why is listening important? If you listen well, like I mentioned right at the start, it helps you in clearly and completely understanding the message, right? That's what it does. So the three words that we keep talking about: specifically, clearly, and without any doubt, which in a way is complete understanding of the message that comes from the other side. Number two, if you listen well, especially in the context of business, you will get better at performing the task, project, or work that is given to you, right? Because if you don't even understand the problem, or if you don't even understand the brief, or you don't even understand the requirement from a stakeholder or a customer, there's no way you're going to be able to give a solution to that problem, or there's no way you're going to be able to create something good to deliver back to that stakeholder or customer, right? So if you don't even understand the problem, the brief that is given to you by an internal or external stakeholder, there's no way you're going to be able to deliver something good to them. So again, effective listening leads to successful execution of tasks, and in turn, because of that, it saves time and demonstrates professionalism, right? All of y'all would have experienced this at different points in your life, where your boss probably tried to brief you on something, and when he briefed you on something, you didn't fully understand what the brief was. So you ended up going in path A, and then you delivered something to that boss or customer. And then he said, "This is not what I wanted. This is not what I was looking for. I was looking for something completely different." So the 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever amount of time that you spent going on that path, which was the incorrect path, is a total waste of your time, the waste of the boss's time, and the waste of organizational time, right? You could have done something else in that time. There's a very nice quote that says, there's nothing more useless than doing something effective that shouldn't be done at all. And you could have spent literally 3 hours on doing something that shouldn't be done at all, just because you didn't receive information in a specific, clear, and without doubt way, right? You didn't do it in that kind of a fashion. So effective listening leads to successful execution of tasks. It saves times, it demonstrates professionalism in you, right? And the third point of the many possible points of why listening is so important, but we've just identified three. Good listening is the key to building great relationships. And the reason why that is when you listen to people in your personal or professional lives, it's like giving them respect, right? Listening is the ultimate form of respect to another person. And the minute you start giving respect to another person, they start respecting you. And that is the thing that really builds a very, very strong relationship between listening, right? So listening is the key to that. Now, the last thing in the box, which I find very interesting, and I asked Arunima to include it there in the form of a box. This is what I often share and have been sharing for 10 years now. I tell people that learning how to listen well is possibly the best investment of a skill learned, because of all the soft skills and management skills that you will be taught or that you should know. Listening is the one thing which is common in each one of them. I don't know of any one thing which is common across the board besides listening. Now, let me give you an example, right? Of course, if you attend a class on communication, they're going to teach you how to listen well, right? It's at the heart of good communication. However, if you go for a class on how to sell better, again, they will teach you on how to listen well. If you do a class on how to do good customer service, they will teach you how to listen well. If you do a class or go for a workshop on how to be a good leader of people, they will teach you how to listen well. They'll tell you it's very important to listen to your people. If you go for a class on how to be a great subordinate or a great team member to your boss or to your leader, they'll teach you again to listen well to your boss, right? So whether you're a leader, they'll tell you listen well. Whether you're a subordinate, they'll tell you to listen well. If you go for a workshop or attend a seminar or do a class on how to be a good collaborator, how to work well in a team, they're going to teach you how to listen well. They say you can't listen well, you can't be in a team unless you're ready to listen to your team members. It's a very important thing. If you go for a class on how to manage your time well, they'll say listen well to what your customers, bosses, and other stakeholders tell you, because otherwise, like I mentioned before, you'll waste 3 hours of your time and then have to put in another 2 hours of work to rectify it if you don't listen well. If you go for a class on how to do good decision making and problem solving, they'll say you can't do good problem solving unless you listen well. If you go for a class on any goddamn subject, right? Negotiation skills. If you want to be a good negotiator, even a good hostage negotiator for that matter, that's the first thing they teach you. If you want to be good at negotiation, learn how to listen well. So it really doesn't matter which subject of management you decide to, or soft skills that you decide to get better at. This is the only skill that will help you in each and every one of these things. And I've not even covered all of them. There are so many more that I could cover. I'll give you another example. If you go for a workshop on how to have how to deal with conflict in teams, they'll teach you how to listen well. It just doesn't matter, right? So I don't want to go on. Now, the interesting part is if you learn how to listen well, it gives you a great return on investment even on your personal side, right? So if you read a book, or you have a lot of online seminars and courses as well, right? Not very good ones, but they are there, on how to be a good spouse, partner, husband, or wife. They'll teach you, they'll tell you, listen well to your partner or spouse, right? That's the way that you build a great relationship. If you go for a course on how to be a good parent to a child across any age group, they'll say if you want to be a fantastic parent, especially for the kids in this generation, you need to be a great listener to them, right? If you're not a great listener to them, you're going to be not able to be a good parent to them, right? If you go for a class on um, not a class, but if you read anything on, for those of you all who are single and looking for a significant other, if you read any material on how to date better, the one thing that they'll tell you is if you go for a date, please listen well to the person on the other side, right? Don't keep talking. If you want to be a good son or daughter to your parents, ensure that you listen well to them because they'll feel respected. If you want to be a good sibling to somebody, ensure that you listen well. If you want to be a good friend to somebody, listen well. If you have problems with somebody in your personal or professional lives, listen well. So I can't tell you the importance of listening, because it is literally the only skill which cuts across the board and is going to help you in every sphere of your life, in every relationship of your life. And you can get better at it starting today. if you take this subject seriously. So I would really prod you to take this subject seriously, right? Now, the next slide is interesting because we're going to talk about who you wrote as the best listeners you know. Right now, very interestingly, I've been asking this question to people in workshops, literally thousands of people I've asked this question to, as to who are the best listeners you know, one in your personal life and one in your professional life. Very interesting data, right? Very interesting data. So in your personal life, the answer which dominates is mother, right? That's the answer that dominates. And not that all these mothers across the thousands of people that I've trained, I'm sure their mothers haven't been trained on the subject of listening like I'm training you right now. But for some reasons, the mother dominates this particular area, right? Everybody talks about their mother being a great listener. If it's not their mother, it's often one of the two parents, right? It's the father or a grandparent. If somebody names their sibling as their best listener, it's often a sibling that they have a very, very, very close relationship, more like a sibling that they have, more like, siblings that are friends. It'll never be one of those siblings that you want to kill, right? That you don't get along with. You'd never write their name as the best listener. If you write a friend's name, that friend is likely to be one of your best friends, right? Somebody that's a good listener is likely to be the friend that's your one of your closest friends. You may have somebody who's like a very funny person in your group, like the clown of your friends group. You'd never really put that person down if he's not a good listener. But whoever it is that's a good listener is likely to be your closest or best friend. And I often share, um, and you'll see how strongly this is correlated, because I can almost give you a guarantee of 100% that any friend or family member of yours that's a really good listener is likely to give you very good advice as well, right? If you can literally pause the video right here and think about this thing that I just said, right? Any of your friends or family members that listen really well are likely to give you sensible and good advice around stuff. People that typically don't listen at all give rubbish advice, right? And you'll find this correlation between wisdom and listening. Right now, on the professional side, for years, right, like I can close my eyes and I can tell you for sure that these are the results that come out. So when I ask people on the professional side, who's the best listener that you have, if anybody writes their current boss's name, I just need to ask them a follow-up question. If they write their current boss's name, I just ask them saying, this is a boss that you really love working under. Am I right? And 9.5 out of 10 times the answer to that is yes. Right? That this boss that listens to me very well to what I have to say, I really like working under this person, right? Or on his team. On the other side, if somebody names an ex-boss, all that I need to ask them is this ex-boss, you would consider him like a mentor of yours, right? Would you consider him in that category? 9 out of 10 times the answer would be a vehement and loud yes. This ex-boss of mine that used to really listen to me well was like a mentor figure to me. He taught me a lot, right? Can you imagine? Like almost 100% of the time we get this answer from people. um, if it's a subordinate that somebody talks about, some of their team members, the follow-up question that I ask them is, okay, this person that you identified as the best listener, who's your subordinate, is he one of your best performers? Literally 9 out of 10 times they'll be like, of course he is one of my best performers. They look at me and they think I'm some kind of a baba to give them these answers, saying, how are you telling me this, right? How is this true? Because I've asked thousands of people this question, the same answers come up, right? If it's a customer that somebody writes down, it's very rare that they write down a customer's or a client's name as a great listener to them. All that I need to ask them is this one of the best customers to deal with, one of the smartest ones, one of the customers that you get great work done with? They'd be like, of course, this customer is a great customer because he may not always agree with me, but he'd always listen to what I have to say before taking a certain direction or before going in a certain path. And we love working with this customer or client, right? Now, this particular information is, if you ask me, mind blowing, right? Because there's so much of insight that can come out of this information. And the information is, number one, the thing that can come out of this is an understanding of saying that if you are a good listener, you can build great relationships with people, right? And whether it's your personal life or your professional life, building of really strong relationships is very, very important. I don't think any one of y'all are going to dispute the fact that building those great relationships personally and professionally is mighty important, right? Is your does it just happen that your best friend is a good listener, or did this friend become a best friend because he or she was a good listener, right? In my opinion, the person became your best friend because he or she was a good listener. I know that's the case with Arunima for sure, because I know who her best friend is. And she keeps saying that that best friend of hers is such a good listener to her, and maybe that's the reason why she thinks of that person as her best friend, right? um, uh, in terms of, if you want to be a great boss to somebody, right, if you want to get your people support, if you want to get great work done out of them, right, it's, again, it's extremely important for you to listen well. So like I said, one skill, many benefits out of it, right? And that's the reason why you need to be a good listener, right? Very often there's a lot of stuff that we're going to teach you around listening, but what I tell people right at the start is, the minute you understand why listening is so important, you will learn how to listen well, right? Once you're convinced of the fact that this is supremely important, you'll know what to do, right? Because in every situation, or in most situations, when we know we need to listen well, we know how to do it, right? Because we have, whatever years that we've lived, we have that training of knowing how to listen well when we choose to listen well, right? So you need to understand the importance and then choose to do it. And then you'll see some kind of a different magic happening, right? In terms of you listening well. Now, okay. So when it comes to listening, we have put together a very nice model, which I can tell you is better than almost any other model of listening, which is called the R model, ARE, which stands for you being an attentive listener, you being a responsive listener, and you being an empathetic listener, right? So these are the three things that you need to do in order for you to do effective listening, or active listening, right? So that's the word which is often given to them. So let's move to the first thing, right? What is attentive living as a part of the ARE model? If you want to be a good listener, you need to start by knowing that good listening can only happen when you completely focus on the listening that needs to be done. It can never happen unless you have 100% commitment to the process of listening, right? If you think that you're going to be listening while doing something else, and I mean real effective listening in the context of business or relationships, if you think that it's going to happen while doing something else, no, that's not the case, right? Attentive listening means completely focusing on the listener and eliminating all the distractions that is there. So these words of be 100% committed to the process of listening is important. Okay. Now, if you want to practice attentive listening, the first thing that you need to do is you need to acknowledge that listening is difficult because the human mind is fickle. Okay. Now, I love sharing these examples. I'm going to share a couple of examples with you, right? That'll really help you understand how difficult listening is. So, the National Stock Exchange, NSE, is one of WorkBetter's clients. And many years back, I think close to 8 years back, NSE came to us and they said that we need to, with the people from our organization, do a 1 day workshop just on receiving information or listening, right? 1 day workshop. So they came to us, and this was very early on. WorkBetter was very small back then. And I was conducting the training myself, and I was going to different cities of India, good old days where you could travel and be in front of people, and I was conducting these sessions. So I'll tell you a couple of incidents that happened in two of the cities where the trainer of listening, trying to train people on listening, like as to how difficult it is to listen well. So I was in Hyderabad, and the room, that conference room, was designed in a way where the lunch was served inside the room, inside the conference room itself. So a lot of good conference room where you have trainings going on, they serve lunch outside, right? For some reason, this conference room had the banquet or the buffet, which was in that room in itself. I was close to 1:30, and I'd had a early breakfast. So they started bringing in the lunch, and I was very hungry. And somebody was talking to me. Somebody was reading out some points or something, and when they were just serving the lunch, I smelt, Hyderabad is known for its biryanis, right? So I smelt some biryani being there. And just trust me when I say that for the next close to, I don't know, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, or whatever time, whatever that person was saying had gone bouncer, like they say, right? Gone, went over my head, because my brain was busy thinking about the biryani that was being served because I was hungry, right? The point here is the trainer on listening, who they had paid to train people, that one smell is enough for your mind to get distracted. That's how fickle the brain is. Just one smell, not even a sight, distracted me, right? So that was what that's what happened in Hyderabad. Then I went to Delhi. We were conducting another batch in Delhi, and so the class was going on, and we were doing a quick round of introductions right in the morning. And a woman stood up there and she said, "Hi, good morning. My name is Pallavi." Right? And the minute she said that, um, like I didn't hear what she said for the next couple of minutes. I got totally distracted, because I had a beautiful looking friend in college, whose name was Pallavi, and she happens to stay in Delhi, right? So the minute she said Pallavi, my brain went into some kind of college flashback mode, and I started thinking about her. And then I'm thinking, oh, should I call Pallavi? Will her husband kill me? Not kill me? What's going to happen, right? So I got into that whole mold of thinking, and for the next 2-3 minutes, the trainer, who was paid money to train people on listening, was busy thinking about something else, right? So the thing with listening is it's so damn difficult, because the human mind is so fickle, and yet we think it's easy, right? And one smell can distract you, one new thought can distract you while having a conversation, a sight can distract you, when you're listening, right? So very often, like the third example that I'd like to share, um, I told you that if human beings decide to listen well, they know how to listen well, right? So if you want to see somebody listening well, if somebody's on a really important call, you will see very often that they're looking at the floor and talking, right? If they're on a very important call, they're not even looking on top, because they know that even if they look on top, a sight may distract them from the important conversation that they're having. So they just look at the floor and have a conversation while walking, and that's when you know somebody's having a really important conversation, and they don't want to get distracted, because they know that your eyes can be such a big distractor, to good listening. And I can go on and on about how fickle the human mind is, and therefore, if you want to be a good listener, if you want to be an attentive listener, first acknowledge that this is not easy business, right? This will take my attention. Very often I tell people that if you listen really well, if you listen to this lecture really well, really concentrate and listen to it, at the end of this lecture, you're going to feel tired, right? Because if you're going to take that information and try to comprehend it, it takes that kind of effort. And the reason why a lot of us don't listen well is because of that effort that it takes, that we're not willing to put in. And that's the reason why that happens, right? Arunima, am I sharing too many examples? Let me share one last one, then you
No.
can tell me the question,
Sure.
right? So I was doing work with one of India's top banks, right? And we were talking to their call center, and I asked their head as to who your best performer is, right? Who's your number one salesperson? And they told me about the number one salesperson. I said, what are the 2 or 3 things that they do differently? The first thing that she mentioned is, she said, this guy's a damn good listener. And she said, you'd imagine that he'd have to be a good speaker. He is a good speaker. But he said, trust me, he's a really good listener. And then he, like, he showed me on the floor how that person listens. So he said when he's listening, all the other people on that on the office floor, they're looking here, looking there, and talking. He said this guy literally is looking down and really focusing on every word that the customer is saying, because he picks on each one of those things and then gives them very intelligent responses to that. So he said his number one ability is to listen brilliantly to customers, and that in turn kind of helps him give good responses, right? So I could go on and on and on with the examples of the importance of it and how people really concentrate when they have to. Arunima, you can come in with your question.
Yeah, I didn't actually have a question. I
Hmm.
wanted to share a research that I came across on
Yeah,
point number one.
yeah,
So there's a research that I came across, which is, I think, printed in HBR.
yeah,
It's not a research that I've read myself, but
yeah,
what this research says is that the human mind
yeah,
uh, can process six, 600 to 1,000 words per minute.
yeah,
Okay. However, the average speaker speaks
yeah,
about 175 to 200 words.
yeah,
So you can see there's a huge gap between
yeah,
what a person is saying versus how much we can process in that
yeah,
1 minute.
yeah,
So because our brain is not being utilized completely,
yeah,
we have a tendency of then start, getting distracted or adding our own thoughts or trying to overanalyze or, add, like I said, add our own inputs and just jump to conclusions.
yeah,
So it just goes to show that this is again another reason that listening is difficult, because
yeah,
our our brain capacity can absorb so much information,
yeah.
and because of that, we find it difficult to focus on what the speaker is saying and try to fill up those remaining 800 words with something else.
With something else, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing which is the real enemy of attentive listening and just effective listening all around
Hmm.
is multitasking while listening, right? And a kind of strange human belief that we can actually multitask while listening. And I can tell you that you may be able to multitask if you're having a casual conversation with somebody. No doubt you can kind of multitask during that time. But if you're having a real important discussion, a business discussion with somebody, and if you think you can multitask while listening, listen, even when you're totally concentrating on listening, it's so difficult to listen, as you've seen with my biryani and the other example that I gave you, right? Let alone when you're multitasking and trying to listen, right? So what are examples of people multitasking and trying to listen? You've seen so many people that are on a call on one side and checking some other email on their desktop, right? They're checking some other email there, and and then they're not paying attention to the call, um, and then they miss out on so many details. Plus the other person feels in a way insulted, right? You've seen people asking, saying, tum sun rahe ho na, meri baat sun rahe ho na tum? And then you say, ha, yeah, yeah, I'm listening to you, and you've then given the person a sense that you're not listening to them, right? And very often the person will end up telling you so many things that you'll just miss out on, and later on you'll say, oh no, but he didn't tell me about this. I gotta share this example with you of my poor listening, right? You'll really get the point. 10 years back, I used to work at L'Oreal, and I used to have a boss that's now quite a famous personality. She's the CEO of the Diamond Merchant Association, right? And there was this time where my boss came to me and she said, Swapnil, have you done this work? And I'm like, Richa, you didn't tell me about this at all. So she's like, what? Of course I told you about this. I said, no, Richa, you haven't told me about this at all. She's like, I'm 100% sure I told you here. I'm like, I said, no, no, I'm not. I'm 100% sure that you haven't told me. And we got into this. I was a young, stupid person. So we got into like this silly debate around this. And then my boss walked off, right? And then my colleague, his name was Amit, he was sitting right behind me. He just turned to me and he tapped on my shoulder and he said, Usne tere ko bola tha. I said, what? She's like, yeah, even I was there, and he didn't want to say it in front of her because he was trying to back me up. But he said, Usne tere ko bola tha. And then he started giving me details. And ladies and gentlemen, in my world, that thing had not happened, because I'm sure when Richa was telling me this, I was possibly multitasking. I was probably distracted. And I feel genuinely that she hasn't told me this thing. In my world, it hasn't happened. But as it the reality of the situation was she had actually told me about it. It was literally so embarrassing. And you can imagine what my boss would think about me, right? My boss would say that either this person is terribly distracted all the time and not interested in the work, or he's a total idiot where I've told him something, or he's lying, or one of these things, right? And that's what happens when you're a poor listener and you start multitasking. So a lot of us, including me, I'm a victim of this. Sometimes I do this thing myself, and I shouldn't. Every time I'm doing a class like this, it reminds me that I do it a little, but I shouldn't do it at all. A lot of us use hands free, right, these days. So we're not on our phone like we used to be earlier. And all our phones have turned into mini computers, right? So every time we're on hands free, I sometimes start looking at a WhatsApp message or a email or sometimes Instagram while I'm having a conversation. And it's terrible because then I'm not really focusing on what's happening there. I can't pick up the details, the nuances, the all the things that I need to on that call. And that's a big problem, right? So that's one of the things that you shouldn't do. So from today onwards, if you want to be an attentive listener, 100% focus, 100% commitment to the process of listening. Do not multitask while listening, right? Arunima, before you come in, let me just state one more part. A lot of us are not operating in office right now, but this will also apply at your home. If you're busy doing something on your laptop and if somebody comes to talk to you, right, don't just look at into the laptop and say, tell me and make those hands and look at your laptop and then expect them to talk while you're doing something else, right? If you're busy doing something, tell the person to sit down or wait for a minute, right? Tell them just hang on, finish what you're doing, then probably shut your laptop shutter down, then look at the person in front of you and say, okay, now tell me, right? So when you're listening to somebody, be all there, right? Be 100% there. Do not be on your phone, do not be on your laptop, do not be doing some other task while you're listening. If you're busy doing something and somebody gets in touch with you, tell them to wait, finish the task, or keep the task aside, fully concentrate on them, and you will see a real difference happening in your listening. Okay, Arunima, tell me.
Yes. So you mentioned this at the start a little bit, but I wanted to ask you a more detailed question.
Mm.
Are there situations when multitasking is okay? And I'll tell you where I'm coming from. If, let's say, your friend has just called you to have a chat, it's a
Mm.
casual conversation.
Yeah.
And in that case, let's say I'm kind of busy doing something else, folding
Mm.
laundry or whatever it may be. So in
Yeah.
these cases, can I do both where I can listen and kind of do another task as well?
Yeah, Arima, that's a fantastic question. We've discussed this offline, so you know my answer to it. But for the sake of the audience, I'll tell you. We're communicating all the time, right? So while I may give you a lot of rules that you're supposed to apply in almost all business and work communication situations, I would assume that you need to use these rules that I'm stating, and in a lot of work related, in a lot of personal life related situations too, right? So if your friend calls you and you're just having a casual chat with her while folding the laundry, I think that's something that's okay, right? However, if your friend calls you talking about something a little more serious, like she's probably lost her job or lost his job, or had a bad breakup or had some other problems in their personal life, and you are doing something else while having that conversation, I can assure you that your friend will sense
Mhm.
that you are multitasking while having that conversation, right? So at that point of time, if it's a really serious conversation in your personal life, do not multitask, focus on that conversation and have that particular conversation, right? And don't do anything else. However, like I said, right, tomorrow you could be um, talking and walking. Now you could say, oh, is walking and talking multitasking? Not really. You're not indulging in the multitasking that I'm talking about. Is you being on one work call and checking emails on the
Hmm.
other side, or you being on one call and checking WhatsApp messages and replying to them on the other. That's the kind of multitasking I'm talking about, right? The same thing see, if you're driving, it's ideal not to take calls at all if you're driving. However,
Hmm.
if you have to take a call, you better do it on hands free. And if you're doing it on hands free, maybe you can have a casual quick conversation with somebody, but you can't drive and have a serious work conversation. You're not going to do justice to the conversation, and you're definitely putting you and whoever is in the car and the other people at a hazard. So ideally, that's what multitasking means. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
other thing, Arunima, when it comes to multitasking is that people mistake in the context of work as to multitasking meaning doing two things at the same time. And what
Mm-hmm.
multitasking really means is possibly doing three things within 10 minutes, one thing at a time, right? That's what multitasking actually means if you think about it. That I
Mm-hmm.
do this, I fully concentrate on doing this, okay, then I get into the other task, I fully concentrate on that other task, then I get into the third task, right? But when you're there, try to be all there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Correct.
yeah, just a casual conversation folding laundry, you'll probably get away with it. But other than that, yeah, as far as possible, try to be totally there, totally there when you're listening, right?
Correct.
A good suggestion, if you're going to do if it's a long conversation with a friend, is to walk when you talk, so you get a little bit of exercise going and you're also kind of talking to them. I wouldn't suggest that in business, in most
Mm-hmm.
contexts of business, because of point number three, right, that we're going to state, right? So point number three, if you want to be a attentive listener, and often when I have very little time to explain the subject of listening and people ask me, okay, what's your quickest and best hack to me being able to pay better attention while listening, right? And my answer to them is, if you want the quickest hack, the quickest way of becoming more attentive, start making notes during conversation, right? Because the minute you start making notes, automatically you will start paying more attention. Okay. um, there's a beautiful quote. I'll share two very nice quotes with you. There's a beautiful quote, an old Chinese proverb that says, it says, the faintest of ink is better than the strongest of memory, right? So when you're having business or work conversations, you're, even for the shortest of conversations, if you make notes as to what was discussed there, it will help you pay attention. It will also help you in asking questions later, and it will also help you when you need to reconfirm at the end of the conversation. And it will also help you a week down the line if you want to recollect what you all discussed or what he said, right? So the advantages of making notes are multiple, right? So get into the habit of doing it. Now, when we discussed the McKenzie pyramid model, which was how to structure your communication, we spoke about breaking your communication into understanding what your objective is, then breaking your communication into 3 to 5 points, and in turn, supporting each one of those points with three subpoints each. When you're listening, in a way, you are supposed to listen and make notes in points, right? Because people are often going to talk to you in paragraphs. That's what they're going to do. They're just going to keep talking, 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 talking about different stuff. And if you're a good listener, this is a practice that you'll do, right? You'll kind of break his conversation into points where you'll say, okay, the first point that this guy is broadly making when speaking is this, and these are the few things that he's saying under this broad thing that he's saying. And yeah, the second broad thing that he's trying to say is this, and these are the few. Now you may not be able to do this perfectly like this, in like in the McKenzie style, but literally make notes in points as to what the person is saying. Now let me tell you the entire hog of how you can do it if you make notes, right? So if a person is briefing me on something, the first thing that I need to do is I need to listen to the person. And while listening to the person, I need to make notes of exactly what he's saying and break his broad paragraphs into points. Then once I have those points down, what I can do is I can say, okay, I have a few questions on each one of these points that you shared. So, because you haven't interrupted the person first, so now you have these 3 points, and you say, okay, kind of get all the details that you need to get through the questions that you asked, right? So, you fill in these details that you have. Then, after you ask those questions and he gives you the specific details, you can say, okay, now let me reconfirm my understanding of what you're trying to tell me. Basically, you have 3 points that you have. Point number one is this, point number two is this, and point number three is this. Under point one, these are the two, three things that you have as concerns. In point number two, these are the things in point number three, right? So now you have listened very well and made notes, right? You've made notes. You actually made notes in points. After you've done that, you said, okay, do I have any questions on these 3 points? Then you asked whatever questions you got the specific details from them. After you got the specific details from them, you said, okay, let me reconfirm my understanding. And you really read the points out and you said, okay, have I got you right? And then the person will be, yeah, yeah, of course you've got me right. And if you start kind of receiving information in this way, you will become a very, very good listener. And the point that we put earlier, right? If you receive information in this kind of a way, people will actually look at you like you're a real seasoned professional. If you don't do it in this kind of a way, and what we typically do, we interrupt people, we don't ask enough questions, we don't make notes, we don't reconfirm, we don't do any of the things that I just mentioned here, right? And we need to start doing the bang opposite. But what you will realize is that if you do not make notes, your ability to ask questions goes down. If you do not make notes, the specific details that will be given to you, you won't be able to capture them well. If you don't make notes, you will often struggle to reconfirm at the end, right? So in my opinion, from today onwards, long or short conversation, this is a very important tip. Make notes while listening. If you are going to, a couple of tips around making notes, right? If you're doing a face-to-face meeting with somebody, and of course now after this session, hopefully you start making notes. Always seek the permission of the other person. You say, sir, I'd just like to make notes of our conversation so that you don't need to repeat yourself again, and I recollect it. And people will love that. The other guy will say, of course, please make notes, because you've already displayed professionalism and given him respect by saying, I really respect this conversation, I'm going to take the efforts to make a note of the things that are important during this conversation, right? So he feels good and respected already. um, if you're on the phone, again, do the same thing, right? Just tell the person, sir, I'm making a few notes of what you're saying. The person will automatically start speaking in a more structured way if you inform him at the start that you're making notes, right? And he'll go slightly slower. He won't rush the conversation. You'll be able to absorb the conversation in a far better way if you're making notes. If you are in any kind of a customer service role, and if you have people getting upset at you, one of the biggest tricks of getting people to cool down is just to tell them, so just a minute, just give me a minute, let me make notes, and just wait for like 15-20 seconds. The person will cool down, say, yes, so now tell me, I'm making notes. It's very difficult for a person to shout at you when you're making notes, right? So the advantage of doing this is on multiple areas. So please start doing it, and don't make notes on some small pieces of paper here and there. Please get a notepad, have a notepad handy in all business situations, right? A good notepad, have a diary handy where you can make a note of any commitments that you give people. You're really not a professional if you don't do these basic things, like having a good diary where you make notes, having a good notepad where you're doing it, and not just writing it on papers that are going to get lost anyway, right? You don't want to operate like that. You don't want to look like that. It doesn't matter what profession you're in, right? So these are the kind of 3 things that you need to do to start becoming more attentive during your sessions, right? Now, the second area of our ARE model is to be a responsive listener. Do responsive listening. So what does responsive listening really mean? Responsive listening means demonstrating behaviors which shows that you are paying attention and understanding what is being said. So it's not just important to listen to the person, it's also important for that person to feel that you're listening to them. We just discussed how important, how great relationships are built if you're a good listener, right? And if the person on the other side doesn't feel that you're listening to them, you're not being a good listener. You're not going to be able to build those great relationships with them, right? So being able to demonstrate that is very important. The start of demonstrating that is when another person is speaking, as far as possible, do not interrupt the person. Allow the speaker to finish before you begin speaking. You'll especially get into the wrong habit of doing this if you watch a lot of TV debates, right? Because all of them, including the anchor, They're constantly interrupting each other, constantly talking over each other's voice. Even in the US presidential debate, if you watch that, that just happened, both of them keep interrupting each other. And that's not a civil way of doing any kind of discourse, right? So that's not the way you're supposed to do it in business or in your personal life. So as far as possible, unless you just have to, do not interrupt the other person when he's speaking. Let him finish before you get started. Now, there's only a small asterisk to this that I'll share, right? In business situations, very often there could be people that digress a lot, that beat around the bush a lot. And what that means is they've said something to you already, you understood the point in the first 2 minutes, but now they're taking another 8 minutes to say the same thing, right? And often in business situations we don't have that much time at hand. So in that case, what you can do is very politely, you need to make a puppy face and very politely interrupt him and say, you say, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but let me quickly try to summarize what I've understood. What you're essentially trying to say is one, two, three things, right? Am I right about that? So you need to reconfirm your understanding of what the person is saying. And the person says, yeah, this is exactly what I'm trying to say. Because very often people are beating around the bush or giving you that extra information because they feel that you haven't understood the point. And the minute you reconfirm that to them and tell them, this is what you're saying, right? They'll say, yeah. He says, no problem, I've understood. Is there anything else that you'd like to discuss with me? Then they say, no, 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 I think it's understood. So you can, only in those rare situations can you interrupt people, but interrupt with an apology followed by a reconfirmation. So that's the way you can do it in those rare situations. Right now, if you want to do responsive listening, you need to do it both through the verbal and non-verbal cues, right? The non-verbal responses. So what are these non-verbal responses? The first one is, all of them are equally important. All four things that Arunima has put down are supremely important. But the first one is, if you're a good listener, you will reflect the emotions of the speaker right on your face. That's what you're going to do. Reflecting the facial expression of your speaker is very important. Now, what does this mean? I think I've shared this in the earlier, a little bit on this on the earlier class on body language, right? That if the person who's speaking to you is excited about something, the facial expression on your face needs to have a little bit of excitement. If the person at the other end is feeling sad about something, your facial expression needs to reflect in a way a little bit of sadness. If the person on the other end seems concerned about something, you need to show concern as far as your facial expression is concerned, right? So this is what all good listeners do. And I've given this example. You can watch somebody like Amitabh Bachchan hosting Kaun Banega Karodpati, and you'll see a masterclass of both speaking and listening there. When Amitabh Bachchan is listening to somebody tell them a happy story, he has a smile and happiness on his face. When somebody is telling Amitabh Bachchan a sad story, you can see a reflection on his face, right? And that makes two people really connect with each other, right? Now, Arunima, did I share the example of my father-in-law? I shouldn't be sharing this example, but this is a secret between us. Did I share it in the last class? Do you remember?
I think we did cover it in body language.
In
I'm
body
not
language.
entirely sure. Yeah.
Correct, right? So I'll give you the short story of it because I think I did cover it. But I shared the example of my father-in-law where I think I told you all, I told you he was a airport manager at Jet Airways. Very often when flights would get delayed, he couldn't do much about it. A lot of people would come and be like really shout at him and be very upset that their flights were delayed. And they were really upset about it, but my father-in-law's expression used to be blank, right? And then it would seem like he just didn't care about it, right? That's what. And he was like, listen, I can't do anything about it beyond a point. But seeing his blank expression, that would irritate the customers all the more, right? And a lot of leaders give me this example too. They're like, I'm really upset about something, but when I'm telling my subordinates about it, they have a blank expression on their face, and that pisses me off and irritates me even more, right? Because they're not even reflecting the emotion of irritation because of this problem has happened, right? So if you want to be a good listener, especially in face to face communication or video conferencing situations, your facial expressions are very, very, very important. Right now, The other things to do if you want to be a good listener is while listening, ensure that you nod your head, right? That's a very good sign that you're a responsive listener. The person feels respected in front of you. When you're listening to the other person, ensure that you make eye contact, right? Because often while listening, the eye contact point is also important from attentive listening, right? Because your eyes tend to be your biggest distractors. You look into a screen with your eyes, you look into your mobile with your eyes, you look and get distracted by your environment. So when you really look at the person and speak, right? There's a very nice quote that says, you must listen not just with your ears, but also with your eyes, because you want to pick up a lot of those. You want to give him respect by looking at him when he talks, but you also want to pick up his body language, what he's trying to say, and that only happens when you make eye contact with the other person, right? There's so much that you can pick up, and which we're also going to learn in empathetic listening, right? So ensure that you nod your head. Don't be lazy about it. Ensure that you make eye contact when you're listening to somebody. And then the other thing that you're doing, especially in business meetings, I may not be able to demonstrate it here as well as I'd like to, but at all points of time, sit straight and lean ahead into the conversation, right? So when you sit straight and lean ahead into a conversation, you give the impression to the other person that you are interested in listening to him, right? So that leaning ahead while sitting and listening becomes very important. Now, on the other side, the verbal responses, and these are important both in person and especially over the phone, ladies and gentlemen, that when you're listening to people face to face, on video conference, or on a phone, ensure that you are doing what is called verbal nodding or verbal responses, right? Which is where you say, uh-huh, okay, understood, yeah. So, right, you keep responding when the other person is talking, and you don't give a radio silence or a total blank there. And when you give that total blank, more often than not is because you're distracted with something else. But when you give that total blank, the person on the other side is going to ask you, saying that, hello, and then hello, you say, yeah, yeah, I'm here, right? And that is now given the person on the other side a terrible feeling that you haven't been listening to him the whole while, right? And on the other side, when you do these things, the responsive listening, that's when the person feels really good, feels really respected. That's when you start building relationships. Arunima, before you come in, I'd like to share something. Now, you need to combine attentive listening with responsive listening for you to be a good listener, because I've seen in my work life, a lot of people are bad at both. A lot of people are good attentive listeners, but they don't give a feeling to the speaker that they're listening to them. And that's bad. A lot of people have mastered the art of doing responsive listening, which means that they nod their head, they listen, they do all the thing, but they're not paying attention at all. They've just become good actors, right? And they especially do this during long meetings, group meetings and all. They just nod their head, they do, but they're not really paying attention, not making notes, not doing anything. So you need to combine the A, and you need to combine the R, and then now I'm going to tell you about the E. You need to combine all these three for you to become an effective listener, right? Don't just practice one of them. Yes, Arunima, come in with your question, please.
Yes. Before I ask my question,
Yeah.
what you just explained is actually a term for it, which is pseudo listening.
Oh,
If you're
okay.
doing
Okay.
if you're just sort of responding with your non-verbal behavior, but
Yeah.
actually not paying attention or thinking about something else, you're not truly listening. So that's pseudo
Correct.
listening. So
Correct.
in order, like you mentioned already, in order to be a good listener, you need to do all three together. You
Yeah.
can't just
Yeah.
pick that I'm going to be an empathetic listener, but not be a responsive listener. It's not going to work
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. 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 Well said.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just share one more thing here. One of which kind of encompasses both the first and the second one. There's a beautiful quote that says, "Give whatever you're doing or whoever you're with the gift of your attention." And I love that word, the gift of your attention, right? Because the minute you give somebody the gift of attention, which is both the attentive listening and the responsive listening, they really tend to appreciate that, right? And that has so much of a positive impact in both your personal and professional lives. My God, if any one of y'all believe that you can get very far in your professional life without building good relationships, you are mistaken. If any one of y'all believe that you can have healthy personal lives with your family and friends without being a good listener, you are mistaken again, right? So that's the importance of both the A and R. Give people the gift of the attention that they so crave for. Yes, Arunima, tell me your question.
My question was regarding verbal responses.
Mm.
Could in a situation, could verbal responses be misconstrued as interrupting the speaker?
No, if you do them well, I don't think they're ever seen as you interrupting the speaker. They need to be done if you're listening attentively, and if you do it, you'll know exactly when to do it, right? Because when a person makes a point or makes a statement, they typically pause a little, and at that pause, if you're really listening well, you'll be able to pick up the pause and say, okay, and doesn't really interrupt a person, and okay doesn't really interrupt yes doesn't really interrupt a person. So don't be worried about that at all. If you're truly listening, you'll do it with the right kind of timing and in the right kind of way, right? So I'm
Got it.
never concerned about it. Yeah. Any other, do you think I've explained this part fairly well, Arunima? Have I missed out on anything?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
No.
Now let's get to the third part, right? We, Arunima and myself, had a long discussions around empathetic listening, right? Because this is such an important topic. So I hope you've been listening attentively to this topic, but I really want you to listen well here as well, right? Empathetic listening means understanding the content of the message and the feeling behind it. There's a very nice quote by Stephen Covey where he says the problem with communication is that we listen to reply, not to understand. And what true listening or empathetic listening is about is taking the effort to understand the content of the message, which is try to comprehend what the person is trying to say, understand what the other person is saying, but also try to understand the feeling behind what he's saying. And if you connect this to responsive listening, like I told you, you will realize that if you don't use your eyes, if you're not fully attentive, you will never be able to capture the content or the feeling behind the message, right? Now, this means paying attention to not just what is being said, but how it is being said and why it is being said, right? You need to be able to do both these things. When you listen empathetically, you are trying to understand the speaker's perspective. And the reason why listening is such an important skill and applies in so many different areas of your life is that the minute you learn how to do this thing is understand the message, understand the feeling behind it, understand the speaker's perspective about something. That is what really helps, right? You've been given one mouth and 2 ears for a reason, right? So that we listen more and talk slightly less, although my job here seems to be to speak a lot. And like I mentioned earlier, people who listen empathetically often give the best output or advice. And I'll tell you what I mean by it, right? If you've had a leader, a boss, or a professional at the workplace that's a really sharp listener, you will find that he says a few things, but he'll give you really good output when he listens to you, right? He fully listens to what you have to say, doesn't say too many things, asks the right question, and then gives you some output that is bang on. And if you had bosses, stakeholders, clients that don't really listen well, they'll keep interrupting you. They don't ask the right question, and then they'll just say some rubbish connected to it. The same thing with your friends, right? The people that just talk without really understanding your situation, they'll never give you the right kind of advice, right? So that's something that you need to keep in mind. Now, we've broken up empathetic listening in a few parts, so let's get to that, right? So like I mentioned, listen to understand, not to reply. So how do you go about doing this, right? Listen carefully. First of all, the job of listening is to understand what the other person is trying to say, right? And if you look at point number 4 here, you'll realize that the understanding what a person is trying to say and agreeing with them are two separate things altogether. You may understand absolutely what the other person is trying to say and yet not agree with them. But the problem that tends to happen is, especially in Indian languages, there's often a lot of confusion with these two words, right? So very often mothers would say, ye meri baat sunta hi nahi hai. And actually that wasn't true. वो आपकी बात सुन रहा है, वो आपकी बात मान नहीं रहा है. तो सुनने में और मानने में बहुत फर्क है, right? Understanding and agreeing are two different things. Listening well doesn't mean that you agree with the other person. It means that you take the effort to understand his message, understand the feelings behind the message, and you try to understand his perspective, right? And whether you agree with him or not depends on the merit of the issue that you're talking about, right? So if you want to do that well, the first thing you need to do is let the speaker finish, and as far as possible get yourself into the habit of pausing to process the information first in your head as to what he said. And really, in that time that you're processing, thinking, do I have any questions? Even before you get to the reply part, you need to ask yourself, by processing the information, pause, process, ask yourself, do I have any questions, rather than thinking, what should my reply be to this thing, right? And if you don't have any questions to that, then you can formulate your response and then reply to that person, right? That's a good, mature way of having a discussion, right? Do not plan what you're going to say next while listening as far as possible. And that's what most people do. There's a very nice quote that says, more like a question, which says, are you really listening, or are you just waiting to talk? Right? Because most people are either talking or they're waiting to talk. They're doing one of these two things. So are you really listening, or are you waiting to talk? And people that are really listening, they do this thing: they let the speaker finish, they practice pausing. It can't be too long a pause, but they pause to kind of process the information, and then they formulate your response, and they give it back, right? You'll find a lot of good people in meetings doing that. When you share something with them, they'll really listen, and they'll say, and often the words that they'll use, they'll say, that's interesting. That's what they'll say, that's interesting. And that, when they're saying that's interesting, very often that's a filler for you to kind of process the information. They'll say, yeah, that's interesting, because interesting doesn't mean that they agree with you, that nothing. It just says, they'll say, that's an interesting point of view. And then you can actually see them processing the information. And then the first thing is, okay, do I have any questions? And no, if they don't have a question, then they'll go about replying to what you have to say. I love people that communicate in that kind of fashion, right? Ultimate professionals do that, right? Now, the third thing is focus on the intent behind the message. When you're listening to understand, that's what you need to do. Ask yourself, what is the person actually trying to say? Listen for the big pictures instead of getting caught up in the details. Understand the overall point of the conversation. Now, I have a few examples to share here, starting with a very close and personal one, and something I would do very, very badly when I was younger. I think I do it slightly better right now. My mother is somebody that's constantly getting worried about stuff, right? I don't know, maybe because I'm the only son, I don't know what the background is, but she's constantly getting worried about everything. So everything that she would say to me, um, don't do this, she'll always have a don't do something thing, right? And initially I would get very upset by what she would say and get very irritated, but as I grew older and learned a lot of these concepts, I would really try to listen to what her intent was. And in a lot of cases, her intent was, when she was speaking, although she wouldn't say that, her intent was concern, and in turn my safety in certain situations, especially when I was younger, right? her, her intent was not to kind of say, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. It was more, she was concerned and she was worried about the safety. So when I actually listened to not just her words, but try to understand her feelings, her perspective, her intent, I realized that that's what she wanted. And then what I would do while replying to her is, I would reply around addressing that concern that she has about my safety, and tell her that, don't worry, I will take this measures to ensure that me and whoever's going with me is safe. Now, does that put you to rest? Then she would be like, okay, now I'm feeling slightly better, right? So instead of just picking on what she would say, I would try to understand the intent, the feeling, her perspective, and then try to reply to that. So that's what this means of listen to the big picture instead of getting caught up in the small details, and understand the overall point of the discussion. Right now, let's look at a business discussion where somebody has a opposite point of view, or a point of view that you don't really agree with, right? What you need to try to do is, you need to ask yourself, what is this person actually trying to say? what is the person's intent towards saying this thing? What does this person ultimately aim to achieve based on what they're saying, right? So for example, if a point of view from the other side is, oh, we need to lay off people in our organization because of corona or whatever it is, right? And you may have a different point of view on it. Now you can keep arguing saying, oh, but how can we lay off people and how can we do that? That's having a conversation at a very superficial level. You're not really listening to understand the intent of what the person is trying to say, right? And maybe the intent of what the person is trying to say when they're saying that I need to lay off people is they're worried about cost cutting, right? That is a factor to them because they possibly know that business is bad and they're worried about that angle of cost cutting. So you need to kind of get to that. You need to probably address this by listening to them and say, listen, I understand what you're trying to say and what your basic concern is, that you know that our costs are escalating, and in this current situation we may not be able to afford it over a long period. So I understand your main point, your overall point of the conversation is the importance of cost cutting, and what you think is the route to do that is by laying off people. But if this is your end objective, which is to cut the costs, maybe we can discuss a host of other ideas also that could help, and then decide what the right course of action is. Right now, that's a mature way of having a conversation. That's a way in which you have a conversation when you're actually listening to reply, and listening to understand and not just reply. And like I mentioned, understanding does not necessarily mean agreeing with the speaker. Agreeing with somebody or not depends on the merit of the matter, but take all the effort to know the intent and to truly understand both the message, the feelings, the perspective, and the intent behind what they're saying. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an extremely important point in your life, both professional and personal, right? Yeah, I'll give you another example, that parents often face, especially of teenage kids, right? So a teenager may want a night out or want to go and party, and the parents often are at loggerheads. And very often then that teenager will say that, oh, my parent doesn't understand me. And the reason why that is that parent is not doing a very good job of listening to them to understand. And what that actually means is your ability to listen and say that, hey, I understand that parties are fun. I love parties myself. I understand that all your friends are going for it. I understand that this is something that you really want to do, and is really, really enjoyable, right? So I understand all of those things, and I empathize with you on that. However, given that your exams are literally 1 week away, it's not possible for me to say yes to you going and spending probably 3 nights outside, right? It's not possible that you go and do that. But I understand your feelings behind this. I understand how much fun it is. I understand how much you want to go. But this is the reason why I can't agree with you. So try to understand his world. You may or may not agree to it later. Arunima, have I covered this well after our discussion, or do you have any questions around this, or do you want to add anything to this?
No, I think you've covered it well. I think one example that we talked a lot about was when it comes to political discussions as well,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
often that's the situation where you tend to have differing views
yeah,
compared to the other person, and we get caught up with the fact that okay, that person supports XYZ versus who you support,
yeah,
rather than trying to just understand that okay, why is it that you support this person, or
yeah,
like you said, the intent behind it, rather than getting caught, because very easy when you focus on just the details for you to
yeah.
interpret a lot of things,
Correct,
which will then
absolutely.
lead to misunderstandings. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So it's very interesting, right? So it's we earlier discussed that ensure that, especially in business discussions where somebody's sharing a brief with you and stuff, it's very important to pay attention and grab absolutely each and every detail down. And here, if you look at this, when you're talking about the meaning behind the message, very often you're like, we're saying don't get caught up in the detail, but try to understand the overall message that the person and the intent at which the person is coming from, right? um,
correct.
I love this quote which says your ability to hold two uh, your ability to hold two opposite ideas and yet be able to operate as a sign of first class intelligence, right? So just totally different details on one side, and at certain times when you're trying to understand it, you just need to focus on the intent and have a discussion from that point of view, right?
I I
Yeah.
think, sorry, could I add a point?
Yes,
I think
yes, yes.
this doesn't say that don't look at the details or don't
Yeah.
be concerned about the details. I
Yeah.
think it talks more about, okay, you have the details at one end, but
Yeah.
also kind of get all the details and then kind of get an idea of the overall picture. So
Mm,
so it's all about context. So you can't take that detail out of context, because then it's
correct.
easy to kind of lead to misunderstanding. So you do have details on one side, but it's very important for you to understand the overall idea behind
Absolutely.
the message.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now the second point here is keeping an open mind when you're listening, right? So the first thing that we said, if you want to be an empathetic listener, listen to understand, not just to reply. Listen with an open mind. And there's a beautiful quote that says, true listening is allowing somebody else to change your mind, right? Are you open minded enough to allow somebody else to change your mind, right? And often, again, the bang opposite of that is TV debates where you see politicians, right? All of them come with a certain position, and irrespective of what the other guy says, they don't care about what the other guy says. They're just going to say whatever they want to say. You possibly never seen a politician or even the anchor for that matter just stopping and saying, oh, you know what, that's an interesting point, can you tell me more about that? And maybe that's not their job, I understand, right? I live in the real world, so maybe that's what they're supposed to do there. But very rarely does that happen. And the sign of you being a good listener uh, is when you can go into a meeting, get new information on a certain issue and actually change your mind on it, for you to say, you know what, I thought this was the right answer, but now that I have this new information that you're giving me, maybe my earlier answer was wrong, this is the right answer. And if you think about it, if you have a leader or if you have a boss or if you come across a person that would actually do this, say that, you know what, I thought this was the answer, but now after getting this new information, maybe I was incorrect, or maybe answer B is the right answer, you would have so much more respect for that person, right? But only a person with who can control his ego can actually do true listening and allow the other person to change his mind, right? Otherwise, a lot of people enter conversation saying, this is my point of view. They walk out proudly with that same point of view. And the good listeners are people that allow the other person to change their mind. That really shows maturity, my friends, and your ability to accept that. Now, keeping an open mind is challenging yourself by asking, what if the other person is right about what he's saying? How often do we do this? And how good would it be if we actually did this, right? When a person has a point of view that you may not fully agree with, do we actually ask ourselves this question? What if the other person is actually right about what he's saying? Or another question to ask is, from what this, I may not agree with this entire thing the person is saying, right? But there are these couple of points that are really interesting that I think hold merit, right? The person shared 5 things, I don't agree with 3 of them, but these 2 points really have merit, right? And what if these are, what is it that can I learn from this? Where is it that we can take this and adapt this in some way, right? And that's the kind of thinking that you need to do, that's the kind of listening that you need to do if you want to be a good listener, right? What if the person is actually right about what he's saying, and how often do we do that, right? Actually, very interestingly, the easiest way to be a good thinker, which has been taught by philosophers for 1,000 years, and they said something very simple. They said, if you want to be a good thinker, start with a certain position or opinion that you have, and then try to think why you're wrong about it. That's the simplest way of good critical thinking. Start with a certain position or opinion that you have, and then try to think what are all the reasons why you're wrong, right? So literally, Jordan Peterson, one of the famous professors, he says that good thinking is like having two people in your head, each one of them debating against each other, right? That's what you need to have, two people debating each other within your own head to come up with the pros and cons of a certain issue, and in turn a final decision of what is there, right? But more often than not, we need to also use other people in that process to tell you why a certain position that you have is incorrect or can be bettered. But if you're not going to have an open mind and listen, how will that happen? We're not going to get good at decision making, right? Now, keeping an open mind also means point number three, right? It means point number three of when recognize that you may have biases or preconceived notions towards the speaker and topics, and consciously try to keep those biases for or against that issue aside, right? And again, this is not just about political discussion, these are business discussions or anything. You may have a bias for not laying off people. That may be your bias. You may naturally feel that no, 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 we shouldn't lay off people. But you shouldn't step into a conversation with that bias that we shouldn't lay off people. You need to step into that by trying to keep that bias aside and trying to judge and listen to that person and try to judge what he's saying by the merit of what he's saying given the situation you're in. If you step into discussions with certain biases and you're not aware of those biases, or you don't keep them aside, you're not going to be a very good communicator, and especially not a good listener, right? um, Tomorrow, if you're having a political discussion, I hate discussing political discussions because I find them so useless, but if you're having amongst friends a certain discussion, don't try to prove yourself right. If somebody has an opposing point of view, don't try to make your point. First, just quietly sit down and listen to what his point is and ask more questions and try to understand what he's trying to say, instead of trying to make instead of trying to make your point, right? You learn much more from that discussion. And the other thing, the last thing to do is withhold judgment till the end. What this essentially means is a lot of us, because our minds are so fickle, when people are speaking, even before they've completed what they have to say, we jump to conclusions and we make assumptions, and then we don't even listen to the rest of the topic, right? So let's assume that a person has to say so many things. When he completes 20% of the conversation, we've already jumped to the conclusion. And then this 80% of conversation that is there, we barely listen to this 80% of the conversation because we've jumped to conclusion, and it's our minds are fickle. So you need to, while listening, as far as possible, let the person finish and don't withhold your judgment till the person is done, from the point of view of thinking that this guy, every person knows something that you don't know. Every person may have something interesting and intelligent to say. You need to have this kind of a mindset if you have to have an open mind, right? If you have to do it, so you need to come from that perspective of that, right? That's when you'll be a good learner. This is a great quote, right? A great line that says every person knows something that you don't. Every person is capable of teaching us something if we have an open mind. Now, again, if you want to be an empathetic listener, listen to the speaker's feelings. And the way to do that, like I mentioned earlier, is observe their body language. Are they fidgeting? Are they making eye contact? Are they uncomfortable? Are they defensive? You remember good old Indian parents would say, "Aankhon mein dekh ke batao," right? Because they'd want to really look at our eyes and determine whether we're lying about something, whether we're scared about something. The cops, the police often do that, right? They want you to make eye contact because they want to read your body language and get a certain idea of whether you're being truthful or not. So try to listen to the speaker's feeling through your observation. Notice how they are speaking. Is their voice shaky, mumbling? What is it that they're actually trying to say? Because very often people are in trouble, and if you're not going to be an empathetic listener, you'll not be able to grab that. Very often when you're briefing somebody, or somebody is responding to you, and if you don't listen to their voice, to how they're actually saying stuff, you may not be able to get their exact emotions, and then the person will feel that you're not really listening to them, and try to imagine and feel what the speaker is feeling, right? So a very nice way to put it is try to put yourself in their shoes. That's what you're trying to say. Put yourself in their shoes while listening to them, and that is a part of empathetic listening. So you've learned the A, which is attentive, you do the R, which is responsive, and you do the E. And if you do this ARE, you will be an awesome listener. And this is close to 50% of all communication, right? Now, Arunima, any questions on listening, or should we get into the reflection zone?
I did have a question actually
Yeah,
earlier, but
yeah,
I was waiting till the end for it. So we
yes,
started our discussion talking about
yeah,
how important listening is. And
yes,
you mentioned that a person automatically becomes a good listener if they understand the importance of it, right?
mm,
That's
mm,
one.
mm.
If why are, is there any other reason that people don't pay attention to listening as much? Because you also mentioned that you know that speaking, you can tell if someone's a good or a bad speaker. You know that someone's poor at writing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
but why is it that people don't give attention to listening?
Multiple reasons. I truly believe the first reason is not enough people have been trained on communication skills, and they're especially not trained on listening well. So nobody's really told them a lot of these things. So that's one of the main reasons why people don't pay enough attention to listening. The second thing is what you said, right? Listening gets hidden very often and speaking
Mm-hmm.
gets more attention to it. The third reason is that listening is very, very tiring. And in most
Mm.
cases, human beings don't want to do anything, which is very, very tiring. Yeah, that's the third reason why people often don't listen well. I could go on, right? Actually, the people don't listen well because they don't understand the kind of impact that it has on their interpersonal relationships with people. And literally, if you want to build relationships with people, start by being a good listener, right? Dale Carnegie has a quote, I may not get the right words, where he says, you will make more friends uh, in one day by listening to the other person than in 10 days you would by trying to tell them about yourself, right?
Mm.
You'll make more friends in one day by listening to them than you would in 10 days by trying to tell you something about themselves. Because the minute you start listening well, you become good at building rapport, relationships, all those things start happening, right? we
Correct.
don't we don't train people enough, we don't tell them enough of these things, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the reason behind it. I am
Got it.
hoping that this session and people that have joined the coaching, I'll give you an example, right? So when we're doing these calls, when we're doing the diagnostic calls, even for our coaching program, the communication coaching program, very rarely does anybody ever mention that I want to be a really good listener, right? They'll say I want to be a good speaker, they'll say I want to present
Correct.
well, they'll also say I want to write well. Who says they want to listen well, right? That's the
Mm.
most unglamorous part of work. But how do you get a brief from your boss? Through listening. How do you get a brief from your customer? Through listening, so on and
Correct.
so forth, right? So I could go on with that, but just underrated skill, but a
Correct.
very important one. Yeah.
Got
So
it.
the reflection zone. Now, what we want each and every person to do is pause the lecture here and reflect over the following statements. Do you, and be truthful. If you're not truthful, this exercise won't help. Do you interrupt people to get your point across? Do you make eye contact with people when you speak to them? Do you check your phone while someone is speaking to you? Both. Are you checking it when you're in front of anyone? If you're using your hands free, are you checking your phone while speaking to the other person? Do you attempt to understand the speaker's intent behind what they're saying? Do you listen with the intention of letting someone change your mind and opinion? Are you the kind of person that will actually sit down and say, you know what, your opinion is better than mine, your idea is better than mine? This is an interesting point, right? So therefore now, I with this new information, I don't think we should do this, I think we should do this now that I have this new information. Or do you say that, oh, this is my opinion and that remains my opinion, right? um, uh, Mahatma Gandhi had some beautiful stuff to say around listening, and one of his quotes is something on the lines that if I've changed my opinion about a certain issue, it's because I have matured, right? So he wouldn't feel embarrassed to change his opinion on something. He would just say, I've matured, I know more now, so I've changed my opinion on it, right? Now, given this entire session, now that you know if you're a good listener or a poor listener, think of any 3 to 5 things that you are going to start doing differently in order to be a good listener. Ensure that your takeaways are in this form of specific and implementable action points, right? Pause this lecture right now and really think and introspect and make your 3 to 5 points here. You'll also have to discuss these 3 to 5 points with your coach. So he's going to ask you about it. And I want you to have a lovely discussion on this thing. And of course, you're going to have to summarize this entire thing for him as well as part one of your exercises, right? That's what you're going to have to do, right? So I hope you've paused it. I hope you've done it. And I'm going to move on now. Okay. Now, part B of receiving information in a correct manner is asking questions or probing, right? That's what it is. Now, most people don't realize this thing, but the entire purpose of asking questions to another person is to get a specific, clear, and without doubt understanding of what the other person is trying to say. That's the entire purpose of asking questions. And very often we get caught up in all the other things, but just understand, you need to ask a question to get specific, clear, and without doubt information from the other side. A man who asks a question is a fool for 5 minutes. A man who does not ask a question is a fool for life, right? So that's why asking questions is so important and yet so underrated in India, right? Now, why should you ask questions? Because most people will speak in an unspecific manner to you. Asking questions, therefore, helps you extract the specific information that you need. Asking questions also help you clarify on the doubts that you have. Very often, you could have understood the thing, yet may have a tingling doubt in your mind. That's when, through your questions, you need to clarify doubts that you have. Right questions will never lead you to be a victim of assumptions. And like I mentioned, if you haven't understood the speaker specifically, clearly, and without any doubt, ask questions till you get complete clarity, right? So we have a diagram that we show you later, but again, I'm going to draw it at various points here, right? So this is the speaker. Now you are receiving information, or the listener, right? So he's sending information, you are receiving information. So he sends the message across to you. Okay, you listen and you make notes. After you do that, you may have questions. So you ask questions and you clarify doubts that you have, right? Then you receive the specific details that you require, and after that you reconfirm your understanding, and in the end you summarize the discussion, right? So this thing keeps going on when you're having discussions with people. Okay, now a lot of people, especially when I tell them about asking questions to clarify doubts, the first thing that they'll ask me is, if I ask questions, won't I look stupid? He who asks a question is a fool for 5 minutes. He who does not ask a question is a fool forever, right? That in most situations, it's best to open your mouth and ask questions than to do the wrong work later. Very often they ask me, if I ask questions to my boss gets upset. What do I do? To which I tell them that if you ask questions, he may get upset. But when you do the work incorrectly, what is he going to do? He's going to get even more upset, and he's going to tell you that if you didn't know, you should have asked me. No, he's going to say that to you. So sure, he will get a little upset if you ask him questions, but he'll get far more upset with you if you don't ask questions and do the wrong things later, right? And there are very many reasons why bosses often get upset when you ask questions, right? Which I'm not going to get into in this class, but you just need to keep that in mind. So at all points of time, don't get embarrassed to ask questions. Ask questions. Now, let me just share one thing. The reason why your boss on the other side could get irritated, or some customer may get irritated when you ask questions, is because they expect you to have that knowledge already, right? They also may expect you to have that knowledge based on past patterns that you haven't observed. So you should have made that conclusion by now. And then when you ask those questions, that may irritate them. But having said that, being in the dark, not having specific information, having doubts in your head is far worse. So please ask questions at that point of time, right? Now, the last part here is reconfirming your understanding. So let's understand what that means. Reconfirming your understanding, in simple words, is what a waiter does at a restaurant, right? A waiter doesn't repeat your entire discussion, he reconfirms only your order. Now, what does that mean? See, if I'm with a bunch of, say, 8 people at a restaurant, We amongst ourselves and with the waiter, we may have a 20-minute discussion around what to order and then eventually order. The waiter, however, when he's reconfirming, doesn't repeat that entire 20-minute conversation. He doesn't say, "Sir, आपने पहले पूछा बटर चिकन अच्छा है कि नहीं? फिर आपने पूछा दो आदमियों के लिए काफी है कि नहीं?" He doesn't repeat the entire discussion. He reconfirms the order in the end, right? So he just reads out saying, "Okay, let me reconfirm your order. You ordered two butter chickens, one naan, one diet coke, so on and so forth," right? So in a way, he reconfirms a 20-minute conversation in 2 minutes is what he does, right? Another example, at McDonald's runs literally like thousands of stores across the world, and most of the people who are manning their counters or who are behind their counters are often people who are 12th standard pass at best, sometimes graduates, right? These are the people that are manning the counters. But because of this one practice of reconfirming, the error rate that they have of taking orders is minuscule. It's very, very small. Because if you've been to McDonald's, you know that they will never finally print the receipt till they've reconfirmed your order, right? They'll never do that. They'll ask you saying, "Okay, sir, you ordered this. Am I right? Yes, no." The minute you say yes, then they'll press that button and then they'll process your order, right? So what a waiter does is essentially he reconfirms his understanding. Now, if you think about this, the business discussion that happens between a customer at a restaurant and the waiter is very simple and limited, and yet he reconfirms before placing the order. And yet we end up having very complex business discussions, and yet we don't reconfirm our understanding of a certain thing, right? And that's why we are poor communicators. A lot of people think great communication is about great speaking and also great presenting. Yes, that's a very important part of it, but just this simple thing of reconfirming your understanding of what the other person is trying to say is a solid business practice. Do you know that all kind of, not just a waiter, but all kind of landing and taking off at airports happens on the principle of reconfirming? Without reconfirming, a pilot will never land the plane or take off the plane. And literally hundreds and thousands of planes take off every day and land every day, and they do that safely because of good communication practices, and one of that is reconfirming, right? You may have a 10-minute discussion to place the order, but in the end he takes like a minute or two to do it, right? And this ensures both of you all are on the same page. Now, like I discussed earlier, it's almost impossible for you to reconfirm your understanding of what the other person is saying unless you've made notes. Don't we get very scared when there's a big party at a restaurant and you're giving the waiter the order and he doesn't make notes? He says, "No, no, my memory is enough," and then invariably they will screw up on the order at hand, right? And you feel very comfortable and you feel very good, and you know that the restaurant is good and the waiter is trained, when after that long discussion he will take the effort of going through each and everything and reconfirming it in a way where everybody can hear it, right? So there's no gap of communication and wastage and time spent and all those things, right? All about good communication, my friend. Do not mistake it with just being good at English. So why is it important? It removes all gaps in communication. It makes the other person feel good, as it shows that you've been listening attentively. Like we mentioned, reconfirming is not repeating the message, it is stating your understanding of it. Now, why don't we reconfirm? Two things to remember. We don't reconfirm because of overconfidence or underconfidence. These are the two reasons why what is overconfidence? I've understood, I don't need to reconfirm my understanding of it. So that's the reason why we do it. Or underconfidence, that we're not really confident that we've understood the entire thing, so we don't reconfirm. So for one of these reasons, we don't tend to do it. And that's the problem. Overconfidence or underconfidence, which means we weren't listening attentively throughout the conversation. We don't know the importance of reconfirming and how it's done, right? Without making notes, it's almost impossible for you to do it. And you can reconfirm beautifully if you make notes in points. Right now, yes, make notes, pick out the key facts, feelings, opinion, and share these back with the speaker. Okay, now what is this point of summarizing? So summarizing and reconfirming are almost like cousins of each other, right? So a good business communication practice is, at the end of a business discussion, before you're going to part ways, before you're going to end that meeting, it's important that you summarize the discussion. And what does that summary include? Summary includes two things. This is at the fag end of the discussion before you're going to leave, and I'll tell you why you should do it as well. There's a very important strategic reason why you should do it. How you do a summarization in the end is you state all the key points that were discussed in that interaction or meeting, and you discuss all the action points that need to happen, right? So a summary is nothing but a verbal minutes of a meeting that you need to do, right? Now, what are key points? Key points are the important points. What are action points? Action points is very simple. Just have this one line in mind. Who will do what by when, right? Talking about who will do what by when is what your action points are basically, right? So a verbal minutes of a meeting is what it is done at the end of the discussion. Now, the person in a business meeting or an important discussion that does the summarization is often looked at as the leader of that meeting or the leader of the pack. So if you want to get the subconscious advantage of being the leader of the pack, it's often the person that takes the effort to do the summarization. So be that person that often proactively says, I just quickly want to summarize before we discuss. These are the key points and these are the action points. Have I missed out on anything? Yes, no. If so, no, you disperse. Now, lots of studies from the world's top institutes have shown that meetings that end or discussions that end without a summarization, what happens after those meetings is very poor work output, right? So that output of the meeting is very poor if you don't end it with a summarization. So always take the effort to reconfirm a discussion, and at the end before you disperse, always do a summarization, right? Now, this is the chart that I kept drawing. While a good business, while the speaker is talking, listen actively, make notes, then ask questions to the speaker to get the specific details and clarify whatever doubts that you have. The speaker gives you more specific details. You end, listener reconfirms his understanding and summarizes the discussion at the end. So this is a beautiful business discussion, whether it's a 5-minute discussion, whether it's a 2-hour discussion, but in all situations when you're receiving information, this is what you need to do. And after you fully understood the information which is given to you, of course, you can reply with whatever replies you have to each one of the points that the person states, right? So I showed you earlier where he says point 1, point 2, point 3. You ask whatever questions, get more details, you reconfirm saying, okay, so if I've understood, these are your 3 points. And then you can say, okay, I have a few points that I'd like to add to point number 1. This is my reply to what you have to say. To point number 2, this is my reply. To point number 3, this is my reply, right? So you start speaking like a real professional in a structured way, and then you will be way above the rest of the people if you start doing this, right? Now, doing this requires you to be more conscious about the way you start communicating. It requires nothing else. Go through this lecture a couple of times if you want to really understand what we're trying to say by good listening, good receiving of information, how you go about asking questions, how you have a good, how you do reconfirming and summarizing in the right way, right? Okay, so we're at the end of the workshop. What I'd like you to do is make a note. You made in your reflection zone a few notes of what your takeaways are from listening. But if you have any more takeaways, this is the end of the session. So make a note of all those takeaways that they have. Try to implement them immediately, but at least have a discussion with your coach on this subject and try to implement it in the week after that. Right? Arunima, do you have any questions on the overall topic of receiving information, listening, asking questions, or reconfirming?
Yes, I wanted to bring up 2 points.
Yeah.
Um, First point is, so in an offline discussion that we had a conversation around mental fatigue,
Mm,
um, and its relationship with listening.
yeah.
So could you briefly just kind of talk about that so even our
Correct.
viewers can kind of.
Correct. So mental fatigue and listening, there's a deep relationship between it, right? Like I mentioned, if you're going to listen very attentively in a very responsive way and in a very empathetic way, which is the active listening thing that we spoke about, it's natural for you to get tired. right? Because you're processing so much of information. And very often, you need to realize when you're mentally tired. And then
Hmm.
if a person on the other side is trying to give you more information, you could possibly ask for a break, right? And take a
Hmm.
break, refresh yourself, and come back into the meeting where you can actually pay attention. So good listening is also about realizing when you're mentally fatigued and can't process information, and take a short break. Or often you'd feel like you need a long break where you could ask the other person whether you can continue the discussion tomorrow. But be very
Hmm.
conscious and aware of that, because
Hmm.
that tends to happen. Sometimes we get tired, and then we take rash decisions because we're not listening and processing the information
Correct.
properly, right? In the end, like I mentioned during our discussion, you listen from here, but you process it in your head. So
Correct.
the state of mind that you're in plays a big impact as to how you're going to interpret what you're listening to.
Right.
And of course, judges in the court of law are taught this in great detail, because when they start getting tired, they process information in a different way, and in turn
Hmm.
give judgments that may not be the right one. So they need to be very aware that they're getting tired and take breaks at appropriate times, so that they take care of their mental fatigue. But that would happen to a lot of people, and
Got
then the decision making and the output gets hampered because of that,
it. Hmm. Got it.
right? So just I want to repeat this thing: you listen, it gets processed here. Your state of mind is very important, and depending on your state of mind, the output will start coming in writing. Your decisions will start coming, and that can get all bad if you don't keep that in mind.
Correct.
Mhm.
The second question I had is, in a longer, let's say, business discussion, which
Yeah,
is going on for, let's say, 2 hours.
yeah,
You've
like
made
this
it,
one.
yeah, you've made it pretty clear that you summarize at the end of the discussion, right?
Mm,
But
mm.
when exactly do you reconfirm and how many times?
Okay, so good question again, right? So typically, if you have a long discussion, invariably that long discussion will have different parts that you're discussing, or different
Mm-hmm.
points, right? So if you have
Mm-hmm.
point number one in a way, and it's a long
Mm-hmm.
discussion you had over point number first, reconfirm it at this stage as to what your understanding is, right? There
Got it.
could be another point that again you need to reconfirm. And what summarizing happens at the end of this entire discussion, right? You're
Hmm.
done with discussing all the points that you had to discuss. Then you do a summary saying, okay, these were all the 6 key points that we discussed. These are the key points, and these are the action points that now we need to have from here on. So summaries happen at the end. Reconfirming happens at different parts during the discussion. Right now, I'm not saying
Correct.
each and every part requires a reconfirmation. Sometimes it
Hmm.
may not require a reconfirmation. Sometimes the other party may have to reconfirm what the point you're trying to get across, and they may not do it. But
Right.
yeah, this is the difference between reconfirmation and summarizing.
Got it.
As a leader, very often what you should do is, especially when your people are relatively new to the team, when you share some important information to them, you must encourage them to reconfirm it,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's what you need to do. As a leader, when you share information with your people, you must encourage them to ask questions, right? And you say, please ask me whatever questions you have. Make them very comfortable so that there's no gap in communication. And leaders often don't encourage people to ask questions. They don't encourage them to reconfirm. If you're talking to a child and you're sharing something with them, encourage him to ask questions, right? Make
Hmm.
him feel good when he asks questions, so he has that sense of he feels comfortable doing it, right? And the same thing with reconfirming. So ensure that you do that. And again, like I said, in a business meeting, when you're speaking to seniors, if you don't understand something, make a puppy face and say, sir, I'm really sorry to trouble you with this question, but can you please, I really haven't understood this, right? So make that puppy face so that they probably don't get upset with you, but ask the
Correct.
question that you need to.
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you very
that's it.
much. I hope you guys have made a note of your takeaways from this session, at least 5 takeaways. And you know that you need to summarize the discussion as one part of the exercise during the live coaching session. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for attending this session. I hope you've learned a lot from this session. I will see you during the next class. I hope you're learning and enjoying your coaching sessions. Remember, if you want to get 50% better, the 50% better is not going to just come from listening to these things and not trying to implement them, right? Each and everything that you listen to here, You need to actually absorb it and consciously in your day to day life start applying these things. That's how you're going to get better at it. If you learn something like the McKenzie pyramid model, but you don't take the effort to apply it, how will you actually learn it? Because a person can tell you how to swim, a person can tell you how to drive, they can give a little bit of practice to you, but in the end, you need to practice yourself, right? You've discussed in the past something like speaking with impact, right? Now, if you're not going to practice that in your day to day life a little bit to try to implement it, how are you going to get better at it, right? Just that 1.5 hours is not going to be enough for you. You need to use that 1.5 hour to do a little bit of practice, little bit of exercise, and then you need to take it in your day to day life, right? That's what you need to do. And I hope that each one of y'all are doing the communication gym, which is the speaking aloud for 15 minutes every day, where you read from somewhere, improving your vocabulary 3 words a day, talking to everybody in English if that's the language that you want to improve, and listening to the video suggestions that we've given you. Okay, so please take the effort. We are praying that we really want you to get better, but it's a two-way street. Both of us need to take the effort to do it. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this masterclass on receiving information. Okay, thank you.